we could try to deter North Korea the same way we deter China and Russia. So a lot just depends on your point of view on that. I know our US intelligence agencies have assessed that the North Korean leader is in fact not suicidal. They don't actually believe he's building an ICBM for the purpose of dropping a nuclear warhead on Chicago. They believe he's doing it because in his mind, countries that don't have that capability get attacked by the US. And there's a little bit of truth to that, right? We took out Saddam Hussein, we took out Gaddafi in Libya. So it's also not irrational, I think, what they're doing. But that's the state of affairs, and my hope is we at least try to exhaust every other possible option before we talk about a dark and bloody war that we don't know how it might end. So I'm gonna conclude on something less dark, but equally troubling. All right, so it's cybersecurity. So this one won't actually kill you, but it may cost you some money. All right. So in terms of cybersecurity, we are very far behind compared to what both criminal hackers and foreign governments can do to us. And some of you have heard me tell you this story about a 60 Minutes interview that I was in. So last term, 60 Minutes called my office up and said to my staff, hey, we want to hack your boss's cell phone. And they were thrilled. They said, great, we love you to do that. But 60 Minutes was nice. They didn't actually want to mess up my personal cell phone. So they brought an Apple iPhone off the shelf, gave it to me, and I opened it, and they said, keep this for about a week. We're going to try and hack it. So I kept it for a week. I was in Washington, D.C. Then I came back to the South Bay. Then I went back to D.C. for the interview. And first thing they did is they sat me down, and they played back recordings I had of conversations with my staff, with other people. They actually showed me on a map everywhere I went, even though they had told me to turn GPS off. They also told me they could acquire text messages in real time. It was deeply disturbing and very troubling. And it's something called the signaling system number 7 flaw. If you look on the internet for SS7 flaw, it's the first thing that pops up. And it's something that you can't do very much about because it's not your phone. It's actually in the networks. So what happened is many decades ago when they set up these telephone networks, they were all operating under this system known as a trusted network. And it turns out if you have a telephone network, you can, in fact, listen in real time on anyone's cell phone just knowing their cell phone number. It also turns out that some folks who have these telephone networks include North Korea, Iran, Russia, other adversaries of US, or criminal syndicates associated with it. So if you just have one of these networks, they could listen in on you. Now the chances, right, of someone here getting a foreign government listening in on your cell phone is probably not that high, but maybe if you're a CEO, they might listen in. Or if you work in the State Department, or if you're making stock trades, or if you have insider information. So there's all sorts of nefarious things, right, that criminals and foreign governments can do. 2 days after the interview, the FCC said, okay, we're investigating this. So they investigated it, and then they issued a report a few months ago that basically said, yep, this is a problem. Hard to fix, so they're working with the telecom companies to try to address it. It is better now. So there were certain software things that these telecoms did that did make it better. Still not entirely fixed, so we keep pushing to try to get a fix to it. So now it turns out there's another problem, which is there are companies that, as their mission and business model, they write exploits. In other words, they write hacks for your phone and computer systems and so on. And they sell them to governments. And they would say, well, we're just doing this because, one, it's legal and we can sell it to governments. So I encourage you to, on the internet, search for Pegasus hack. So Pegasus was an exploit, a malware, a hack that this company, wholly owned by an American subsidiary based in Israel, wrote, and it was a very, very difficult to detect piece of malware. And in fact, if there was code in there that if it thought that you had detected it, it would basically erase itself. What it did is it would allow the operator of that hack to turn on your cell phone without you knowing it, turn on the microphone, turn on the camera, and track everything you did, and then feed that into their cloud-based server. And so a government brought that and was tracking some of their private citizens that they didn't like, that they thought were fomenting dissent. It also turns out that it's really hard to control these hacks once they're out there. So now they've discovered similar tools appearing in other governments that didn't buy this from this company, as well as criminal syndicates and terrorist networks. So there is a problem there. It's not the same, well, it's a little bit similar. So if a company, let's say, makes a Stinger missile and they sell it to a government, it is possible that that government would also transfer it to a terrorist network, but it's a little harder. There are controls on that. When you look at what I call these are cyber weapons, there's nothing, no regulations, no laws, no controls. And we're looking at legislation to say, okay, if you're going to develop these cyber weapons, you need to be regulated the same way as if this was a regular weapon. So for example, Lockheed Martin can't just make a weapon and then sell it whoever they want. The US government says, no, you gotta go through this process. We're not gonna let you sell it to these countries we don't like or these organizations that we don't like. So there's this whole sort of new area now where people are realizing, wow, there's these cyber weapons that could do a fair amount of damage and put private citizens at risk as well as a lot of people, because once this gets out, it gets replicated and who knows where it can stop. So we're looking at that issue. And then for many of you here, one of the easiest ways you get hacked is not going to be from a foreign government who purchased, by the way, these things cost between $1 to $5 million to purchase one of these things and get you to install it on your phone. What ends up happening is the easiest way to get hacked is through something known as spoofing. So if you went to a place where there's public Wi-Fi, such as here, I don't mean to disparage this hotel. It's a great hotel. Their chocolate chip cookies are great. It's good. All right. Let's talk about Starbucks. Let's say you go to Starbucks and you sit there and you want to log into their Wi-Fi, and three options come up: Starbucks 1, Starbucks _1, Starbucks 2. Would you know which one was the right one? Maybe all three are right. Maybe two of the three are right. But if you guessed wrong and one of those things was not correct, it could be a hacker sitting in the same Starbucks who just got all your information, literally in seconds. So my advice to you is don't ever log on to public Wi-Fi unless you're very clear that you know that exact address is correct. So one thing I do is I carry a Wi-Fi hotspot with me. You can, any of these stores sell them. You get AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, and so on. And it's a little thing. And then you have your own Wi-Fi, and it's much more secure. So that's my recommendation. Some of you also have your phone set up to automatically log on to Wi-Fi. I would not do that because you could walk past this Starbucks, log on, get hacked, and not even know it. So there are things you could do right now to try to secure your phone. And there's also apps out there that will provide some level of protection. So Lookout is something you could download. It is free, and it provides some basic protection. You can provide more protection by paying more money if you want, but at least the free basic version does some protection for you. And then let me conclude on this point on cybersecurity in the future. So there is not a lot of protection on this phone compared to your desktop, compared to your network servers at work. But if someone hacks it, it's not likely going to kill you or me. But imagine if someone hacked a driverless car. And we're going to see automated vehicles much sooner than later. We're already seeing them now. By the way, the very first automated truck delivery was actually a beer. So that worked. Las Vegas now is running automated shuttle. All these other cities are doing experiments. It has to do with something called deep learning. And so I'm also a recovering computer science major. And I remember when I was in college, there were these folks working on these things called neural networks and deep learning, and we thought, oh, they're sort of fringe. What they would say is, we want the computer to think like a human being. We're like, oh, that's never gonna happen. Well, about 8 years ago, it did. And what would happen is you would take a computer, you'd feed it 10,000 pictures of cats. And then after a while, we'll realize what's a cat and what's a dog and what's an elephant. A little bit scary. I remember talking to a USC computer science professor last year. We were at lunch, and he worked on deep learning as applied to facial recognition. Actually, he told me two things that are quite troubling. One is, he said, computers can recognize faces now better than human beings. And second, I said, well, how does it work? And he goes, well, at a very deep level, we don't know. Which is sort of troubling, right? Because actually what happens is the computer sets up these matrices. So what will happen is you feed it an image, and it just randomly assigns data points. And then it runs this image through 1,000 other matrices, and you feed another image. And at some point, these data points start shifting, and at the end of the day, it figures out, okay, based on these different weights and measurements, that's a cat. But they don't actually know how it got there from point one to the end point. So that's what's a little bit scary. But anyways, that is taking off, and that's what causes, for example, voice recognition to be pretty amazing. You can call United Airlines now, say whatever you want. You could be drunk, you could have a British accent, doesn't matter. They'll know that you said United Flight 1732. That's the same that's happening in automated vehicle technology, and that's why you're seeing these huge advancements, and we're gonna see driverless vehicles much sooner rather than later. The problem is, for the full build out to work, most systems have these driverless vehicles communicating. And once you allow it to communicate, you allow it to be hacked. So I've worked and am working with Republican Congressman Joe Wilson out of South Carolina. We've introduced legislation that basically says to these stakeholders, look, we want the federal government, automobile manufacturers, Silicon Valley, and other stakeholders to work together to make sure that cybersecurity technology advances at the same pace as deep learning, automated driving technology. Because the problem is, if a hacker takes control of your car while you're going 60 miles per hour on 405, it could kill you. It could kill other people. But imagine if a hacker controlled more than one car. And I remember having this meeting last term with this executive who I will not name, from a car company I will not name. And the person said, oh, we got that covered. All our commands come from this central place. I was like, huh, okay. So there's one central place controls all your cars. Well, that's great. What if it gets hacked? So imagine, right, a hacker was able to control a fleet of cars and then run it into a school playground. That would be your problem. Or you imagine if a hacker was able to figure out a way to install a virus on a car, so that it said, okay, in year 2025, at 9 a.m. on January 1st, all these cars are going to accelerate to 100 miles per hour. It could cause a lot of damage. And so we're just trying to at least be one step ahead of what malicious people might do. And finally, you've got great people out there working on the defensive end of cybersecurity. I know Philip has a company that does that. I know there's other people here that have cybersecurity companies. And if you're a medium to large size business, you absolutely have to do this. If you're a small size business, you might want to consider it. And any business that has any amount of records, including governments, needs to consider this. And I'll conclude on this point, which is there is this hack that goes around where they essentially will lock up your files. It's called ransomware. And then they go to you, like for example, a hospital, and say, hey, you can't access all these medical files. Good luck on your next surgery. You pay us $50,000 in Bitcoin, and we'll unlock those files for you. Happened to Hollywood Presbyterian Hospital. Last term, they made a payment, reportedly $17,000. We don't actually know how many other hospitals have had to do this. So I'm also working on legislation to try to get more reporting from not just hospitals, but other organizations. It turns out that police departments and law firms and other businesses with lots of records have also experienced similar hacks. So it's a brave new world out there. I just want you all to understand it. And with that, so honored you invited me to speak. Yeah.